This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to our podcast, Chris Graham. I got Scott German on the line with me. Haven't been able to talk to Scott for a week because I was in New York for the ACC tournament. And but now Scott, with a snow day here in Virginia, he's had a chance to probably spend too much time looking at brackets and everything else. And Scott, Virginia wins the ACC tournament, #1 national seed. Charlotte coming up Friday. We're heading down on Friday for a big weekend of basketball, and this is a special time of year, and Virginia is making it even more special with how well the Cavs are playing right now.
Well, they certainly aren't limping into the tournament, that's for sure. We were worried about whether they would have any incentive, motivation, or whatever going into the ACC tournament, and there was some thinking that it might not be a bad idea for Virginia to lose. Wonder how that train of thought worked out for those folks now. They just rolled through that tournament and, have all the momentum in the world heading to the regional Friday night.
Yeah, and of course, the 1/16 game, Virginia will play Maryland-Baltimore County late Friday night. So it's going to be a late night for Scott and I down in Charlotte, 9:20 p.m. estimated tip. Last game of a 4-game day in that arena. North Carolina will also be in the arena. They're not part of Virginia's region, but the way the NCAA tournament the last several years has scheduled these games makes a lot of sense from an economic perspective. You'll have Virginia fans in the house for the second session. You'll have Carolina fans in the house for the afternoon session. They make sure to sell tickets, so it's a good idea for the NCAA to do that. But a day that starts on Friday in Charlotte at 12:15, Texas A&M will take on Providence. At 2:45, North Carolina faces Lipscomb. I actually watched that Lipscomb team play. They beat Florida Gulf Coast in a very exciting, high-scoring game. So I imagine that Carolina-Lipscomb game will also be high-scoring. Carolina, being the 2 seed, will have the advantage, no doubt, going in. Then at 6:50, the evening session starts. The game that will feed into Virginia's potential second-round matchup. It'll be Creighton, the 8 seed, against Kansas State, the 9 seed, and then Virginia facing UMBC. And that UMBC team had to win its way in. They actually had to beat a good team in Vermont, a team that's had an RPI in the around 80 mark or so. But UMBC, the Retrievers, will be the game for Virginia. And so I haven't really given it a lot of thought, Scott. I imagine you probably have a little bit, maybe your first impressions of Virginia's first-round matchup.
Well, I watched a little bit of their highlights of their game against Vermont, and they're a small team. They're not an ACC type team, but they beat Vermont on Vermont's home floor with a last-second 3-point shot from the top of the circle. So, Chris, we can say what we want, but in the history of this tournament, there has never been a 16 seed beat a 1 seed, and it's not going to happen with Virginia Friday night. They're going to be, I think what's going to happen is they're going to be all in spot. They're going to stand around a little bit, and before they know it, they're going to be behind by 15, and it's going to be over with quickly. But having said that, there are upsets. We know that the NCAA tournament's full of that, but I don't think that's something we're going to have to worry about Friday night.
Yeah, Scott and I have covered this team, especially, for many, many years, but, this most recent vintage of UVA basketball really dates back to 5 seasons ago, the 2013-2014 team, the first of Tony's team, Tony Bennett's teams that got a #1 seed in the tournament. And that team, that they were new. They were like, and Scott and I were talking about this when I was on the train ride home yesterday from New York, coming back from the ACC tournament. We were like the Beverly Hillbillies still back then in an endearing way, not meaning that in a demeaning way at all. But the team before that had not even made the season before had not even made the NCAA tournament. You go from an NIT bid to a #1 seed. It was still all fresh and still new, and I remember that first game against that was Coastal Carolina. That first game in 2014, the first NCAA tournament game. So it was 1/16, and Coastal had a 10-point lead in the first half and still led by 5 at halftime. Virginia won by 15. But they were still learning how to win NCAA tournament games back then. This program now has a history of knowing how to win these kind of games, and I think that does come to play. These guys last year were a 5 seed, had to rally after being down 15 in the first half to UNC Wilmington. But this is a different team, and there's no question about that. Looking at UMBC just a little bit, I did do some of this research last night on the train ride back. This team has played some major conference teams. They started the season with SMU, a team that when the season started, SMU looked like they may have been in contention for an NCAA bid. They lost to them by 11. They played Arizona, a team that's in Virginia's bracket, actually maybe a couple games down the road. Lost to Arizona by 25. They also played, looking at it, they played Army, a team that's actually ranked towards the 300 mark in the RPI. They lost to Army by 11. And also a non-conference game with Towson that they lost by 13 points. Maryland, a Big Ten team, former ACC team, lost by 21 there. So then they went 12-4 in their conference, as Scott mentioned. They beat Vermont on Vermont's home floor to win the conference tournament. So yeah, they've played some major conference teams. It's been a while for UMBC. They play a faster tempo than Virginia. Of course, everybody in the country plays a faster tempo than Virginia. Literally, that's the case. They like their tempos average around 68 possessions a game. Virginia's 59 per game. So all that said, that's at this point anyway, the best scouting report I can give you for UMBC, and a little bit about what Virginia's history has been in these games in recent years. I guess if I were breaking it down, Scott, without having seen much, and I'll do more of this week, looking at UMBC more specifically. Just kind of anticipating how Virginia will play this game. If you're watching the game on TV at home, or if you happen to go down to Charlotte with us, the game may be close for the first few possessions. 10 minutes in, it may still look like the score's close, but Virginia will start asserting will, and maybe by halftime it'll be an 8 or 10 or 12-point game, and by the end of it, it'll feel like you'll see a score that'll look like a blowout, and that's kind of the way Virginia does things. They'll kind of strangle them as the game goes on, but that's kind of the way. That's sort of the blueprint, I think, for how this game will work. UMBC is a team that doesn't play teams this quality, and Virginia will, sort of assert their will as the game goes on. That's kind of the way I see it playing out.
Yeah, well, we know Coach Bennett's mentality is that you just play one game at a time. You concentrate on one game at a time, and they've done that. This is not something that Virginia's done that. They've done it magnificently all season. So I don't think that there's going to be any chance of overlooking a team like UMBC. They may stay. The game may be close. Most Virginia, this style of playing often deters a blowout. Like a lot of people think a blowout because you've got as many possessions. But this is not UVA's first trip to the rodeo here. They're prepared. They're an experienced team. I think everything will work out pretty well on Friday night. Changes a little bit Sunday, but I don't believe in looking ahead. But I like to take that one game mentality, like Coach Bennett teaches.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's sort of where I am with this. I'm not even filling out a bracket. I haven't filled out brackets for years, for a similar reason. We're so focused on what Virginia does, and then outside of that, the ACC, that I don't really watch a lot of other conferences. I don't watch a lot of other teams closely outside of the ACC and then Virginia specifically. So I don't know that I'd be doing any better than anyone else out there in terms of guessing these, the brackets and trying to fill out the perfect bracket and all that kind of stuff, because, this isn't a fun guessing game or anything else. I mean, we have a lot of fun covering UVA sports, but it's also, this is a mission, I guess. And I think I really felt that this week at the ACC, this past week at the ACC tournament. Even more than a game-by-game team, Coach Bennett said it so well. I think it was after the Louisville game. He used the term possession-by-possession. Virginia, he considers a possession-by-possession team. And they don't really look beyond, the next possession. And so, that mentality I think is so important for this fan base to get into, and that's where Scott, I'll say this and kind of get your thoughts on this. I was coming back on the train last night and then getting in the car back here to the Valley. I saw so much on Twitter from people who follow Virginia closely, the media folks particularly, sort of complaining about the bracket. Look at down the bracket. Look at potential Sweet 16 game with either Arizona or Kentucky, and Cincinnati's number 2 seed, and all these things. Virginia got a hard bracket. Well, the way I look at it, Scott, everybody's got a hard bracket. You got to go out there and you got to win the next game. The champion of this tournament's going to win 6 games in a row. That's not supposed to be easy. I don't know. It to me seems like a bit of whining that I don't know if it's necessary or not to complain about those things. You've had a snow day to look at this stuff as much as you can. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's ridiculous. I mean, you've got 6 games to win. You got a lot of good teams. I think what happens, Chris, is that a lot of people don't maybe follow it as closely as others, as maybe you and I do, and they look at these teams and they see these names and they see the Kentuckys, the Arizonas, and they maybe don't look behind the curtain and look at everything that's going on. Kentucky is not that good of a team this year. Kentucky's been up and down all year. They've got some one and dones that Kentucky doesn't strike fear in anyone. But if you were the casual observer seeing a possible matchup with an Arizona or a Kentucky, that might strike fear into some. But the way I look at it is you could literally draw these teams out of the hat. You got to win 6 games, and what difference if you lose to Arizona in game 1? Then what difference does it make whether you lose to them in game 1 or game 3?
Yeah.
You're eventually going to play better teams, and to me, you just take that one game at a time mentality, and you just march through it that way. You can't really play that game of looking at teams and saying, "Oh, this is a bad matchup." To me, it's the Kentuckys and the Arizonas that ought to be looking at it. Oh my gosh, we got stuck with Virginia, because you're playing Virginia, and as well as I did, we've talked about it all season long. You cannot replicate what you're going to face against Virginia, playing Virginia's defense. You commented about your seat at the Barclays Center was on the floor, where we sit above the floor, considerably distance away from the court at JPJ. You don't grasp the intensity, the speed in which Virginia plays defense. Can you imagine having to play against them without having to play them all season? I think if there's a decisive disadvantage for teams, it's for those teams that are having to play us for the first time.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Scott, because the vantage point that I was able to get, very fortunately able to get this past week at the ACC tournament. Yeah, you just can't appreciate it, even watching it on TV or being in JPJ or whatever else. I mean, and so if you're Arizona, Kentucky, Creighton, UMBC, whoever is on the mix here, Cincinnati maybe down the line in a potential Elite Eight game. Watching game tape doesn't do it. I mean, you have to be there and see it and feel it up close. And I caught myself. There was one play in the ACC championship game where a Carolina player was called for an offensive foul. He was dribbling the ball, called for a charge, and Crystal Graham was sitting beside me on press row, asked me what happened, because she wondered why they called a foul, and I had to say, I'm not watching the ball. I was actually watching off the ball, because so much of what Virginia does defensively doesn't, the guy guarding the ball is the least of Virginia's defensive approach. It's watching the how they approach screens and who defends off screens and the screen and rolls and all the help. And so I catch myself as much watching, the off the ball stuff, because that's where the defense really matters. It's not who sets the screen, who gets through the screen. It's what maybe Kyle Guy's doing behind that screen and roll, the third guy on the defense, that matters as much. And it's the same on offense for Virginia, the mover blocker offense. I usually am not watching the ball there either. I'm not watching Ty Jerome or Devin Hall at the top. I'm watching Kyle Guy or Jerome or Hunter running off those screens and watching Jack Salt set those screens because that's again where the action is. And so it's on both ends that it's so hard for opponents to prepare for Virginia. I say this a lot, and I'll say it again. It's kind of like getting ready to play Georgia Tech in football. Georgia Tech, we know from ACC football, they run that triple option offense. You only play it once a year, and the week that you're getting ready for it, you have to work 10 times as hard to unlearn everything you do, everything else, that season to play Georgia Tech. If you're playing Virginia in basketball, and it's not just the pack line defense, it's also the mover blocker offense. Those are two unique systems, and it's really hard for a team. For example, this weekend, assuming Virginia wins Friday night, they're playing either Kansas State or Creighton on Sunday. Virginia plays at 9:20 p.m. Friday night. The game before them, they'll at least be able to watch, whatever they can watch after their own game's over with. But whatever time between 11:30 Friday night and whatever time the game is on Sunday, those two teams have 36 hours to prepare maybe for what they will see out of Virginia. And so that's not a lot of time to prepare for mover blocker, to prepare for pack line. It's really difficult. And then even looking ahead to next Thursday, if Virginia wins the first two games, they're playing Thursday in Atlanta. Arizona, Kentucky, whoever emerges from that other side of the bracket has a few days to prepare, but they don't have that sight line. They won't be in the arena to see it in person. So, yeah, it's tough to play Virginia, and a lot of teams have found that out this year.
Yeah, and I had a chance to do a bunch of reading today and looked at some of the message boards, which is not always a good idea, but I try to counter for everyone that says we got a bad seed, we got you can think of almost an absolute counter to every possible scenario. The one, just to give you some examples, there was some thought of why wasn't Virginia playing the winner of one of the play-in games on Tuesday? At the same time, you can flip that around and say, well, by playing a known opponent, we've got 2 more days of knowing who we're preparing for. That team that wins that game on Tuesday maybe has the jitters out of them, not playing with playing with a little more confidence, not their first game. So, my point is, there's all kind of counterpoints to make. Mm-hmm. You can do that throughout the whole tournament. Hey, Kentucky, if we get Kentucky's got a lot of first-year players that never played against a defense such as Virginia. My point there again is that Kentucky's at a far more disadvantage playing us than we would be against Kentucky. I just think I guess it's early in the week and people don't have a lot more to do than worry about such things. But, you've got to win 6 games. And at some point in time, you're going to play a good team. You're going to play a team that's as good as Arizona or maybe Kentucky or whoever down the line. You just play one game at a time. To me, it doesn't really matter when you play it.
Yeah, I'll go with that too, Scott. I agree with you totally. I was thinking this, again on the train ride back yesterday into the evening. I didn't get to watch the selection show, which is apparently a good thing from what I've read. The disaster that was that selection show. But as I was thinking through it, I would much rather be, if I'm Tony Bennett and his staff and, of course, the UVA team, I would much rather have woken up today knowing exactly who you're going to play Friday night as opposed to, because actually I think the way they do it, maybe those teams play Tuesday and Wednesday. So, you only have 36 hours to prepare for whoever wins that game on Wednesday into Friday night. I'd much rather know now. That's an advantage to me if that's the case. I mean, I know that the other thing is, well, one, those two teams may be worse. I don't know. And they've also had to travel to Dayton, and they got to travel to Charlotte, and they're a little more tired as a result. But, at this stage, if you're Virginia, you shouldn't have to worry about whether the number 16 team you're playing is tired or not. You've played this whole season to get to this stage to be able to win that first game. And then that's where I'll say, too, we've been talking about seeding and all this stuff for weeks. The only advantage is in that first week. If you're a number 1 seed, no number 1 seeds ever lost. Number 2 seeds have lost. Number 3 and 4, etc., have lost. But then after that first game, all bets are off. You're playing an 8 or a 9 seed. That their major conference teams, Creighton from, I guess, the Big East. Kansas State from the Big 12. They've played big games this season. They're going to want to go in and pull the upset. We've seen a lot of 8-9 winners upset number 1 seeds in recent years. So there's no guarantee there. And I agree with what you said there too, Scott. I mean, you got to beat good teams. After the first game, if you're a 1 seed, you're playing a team that you're supposed to beat. But after that, it's, a guy can get hurt. Kyle Guy could sprain his ankle in a game. Ty Jerome could get 4 fouls in the first half. Anything can happen in a one-and-done game scenario. But also, now I'll say this too. I mean, everybody's complaining about Kentucky or Arizona. They got to win 2 games to get to the Sweet 16, just like Virginia does. A lot can happen to any of these teams out there. At this stage, everybody's record is 0-0, and you got to win to play again. And so this is fun. It's also nerve-wracking, but it's a lot of fun because we just don't know what's going to happen.
Chris, you watched Virginia play all weekend up close in person. Was that the 3 best games that they played? I mean, I'm going to take that out. I'm going to ask that differently because I know they played better. I don't think they played that well against Clemson or Carolina in the championship. But do you think that that's the 3 winning those 3 games in the manner in which they did? That's probably as well as Virginia or nearly as well as UVA's played all year.
Yeah, I'll say that. One, they beat 2 teams. Clemson's a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, and Carolina's a 2 seed. I thought, having seen Louisville, that I thought Louisville should have been an NCAA tournament team. So I'm not sure why. I mean, I guess at some point some teams have to be left out, and they were left out. They weren't even the first left out. Apparently Notre Dame was the first left out. I was surprised Syracuse got a bid. I thought Notre Dame and Louisville were the better teams to me. Having seen everybody up close and personal, Louisville's a much better team at this stage than Syracuse is. Syracuse baffles my mind, but Virginia had its best offensive game of the season, literally, against Louisville. They didn't score the most points they've scored all season, but they scored 1.27 points per possession in that game, and they only had 1 game this season where they had a better points per possession rate, and that was Austin Peay way back, like in November, against obviously a small conference team, overmatched team. So for Virginia to have that kind of offensive performance against a team like Louisville spoke to that. Now the Clemson game, yeah, that was a ragged game. Virginia, got called for a lot of fouls in that game. Clemson, I think, was 19 of 23 at the line. Virginia didn't make a free throw until 21 seconds left in the game. So there was a disparity there. All the other stats spoke to a Virginia win of between 12 and 15 points. The free throw disparity, that was, I don't want to complain about refs, but the refs didn't do a good job that day. Virginia would have, had a more impressive win if not for that. I would argue, though, Scott, you said you didn't think the Carolina win was as, the performance was maybe as good. I would say, and I wrote this column after the game. My post-game column was, when I did the analysis, I guess pregame, I said, here's what Carolina needs to do to win this game. They need to rebound offensively, and have a strong game. Second chance points are key to their effort. They didn't have as many offensive rebounds as they did in the first game back in Charlottesville a couple months ago. They had 19 offensive rebounds in that game. They only had 8 in the game on Saturday night, but they turned those 8 into 12 second chance points. They had those 19 they had in the loss in Charlottesville back in January. They only turned into 12 second chance points. So they had, just as many second chance points. I also said what Carolina needed to do was cut down their turnovers. They had 19 turnovers in that first game, the loss in Charlottesville back in January, and Virginia had a 25-3 advantage in points off turnovers, a huge discrepancy in that game. So they went from 19 turnovers, Carolina did in the loss in January, to 9 turnovers in the loss Saturday night. And so Virginia still had an advantage in points off turnovers. It was 10-3, but not 25-3. So Carolina did what they needed to do offensive rebounding wise, cutting down turnovers. Also, they got a huge game out of Luke May. He had 6 points in the loss in Charlottesville back in January. He had 20 points and had a couple baskets down the stretch that were really key. Also, Joel Berry had 17 points in both of those games, but he only needed 12 shots in the game Saturday night. He needed 17 shots in the game in Charlottesville. So, Carolina shot 29% in the loss in Charlottesville. They shot 40% Saturday night. They cut their turnovers down. They rebounded well and still lost. I think they played the game they wanted to play, and Virginia won that game by 8. That's not beating a team when that team's not playing well. Carolina played maybe their B-plus game, and Virginia beat them by 8. I think that may have been the best performance of the season by Virginia. Virginia had just 3 turnovers. They shot 9 of 17 from 3. They made 20 of 22 free throws. That's when you beat a team as good as North Carolina, and they're playing their B-plus game. That might have been Virginia's best game of the season. So that's a good one to send yourself off in the NCAA tournament, I think.
Well, certainly. I mean, that's as we said earlier. Virginia's certainly not lifting into this tournament. I think listening to what you just said kind of makes me rethink that. In that maybe we've gotten spoiled. We've seen UVA win 20 of 21 ACC contests this year. That it's hard to really pick out a performance that's better than others, and they played well against Carolina. I didn't realize they played that well until I listened to what you just said. So you kind of convinced me.
And I'll say this too. And we were both there for the loss, a 1-point loss in overtime to a Virginia Tech team that's in the NCAA tournament as an 8 seed. And Virginia shot 34% in that game. Virginia Tech shot 44% in that game. We shot 38 threes out of 61 shots. I mean, it was the ugliest game Virginia could have possibly played. They lost by 1 in overtime and had to lead with 6 seconds to go. We're a little spoiled in that respect. And, I guess what really stood out to me, all the numbers that I just cited about the Carolina win stood out to me. But even more so, just throw the numbers out for a second. And I'm sure this translated on TV, but being in the arena Saturday night, it really stood out. The calmness that the Virginia team displayed. Twice Virginia got big leads. They had a 10-point lead in the first half. Carolina cut it to 4 by halftime. Had a 9-point lead in the second half. Roy Williams called a momentum timeout, what I call. Roy Williams never calls a timeout to stop an opposing team's momentum. He called a timeout to stop Virginia's momentum up 9. Then Carolina got it back. They cut a 10-2 run, or 10-4 run, and the lead was down to 3. The Virginia kids never flapped. When it got to 3, next possession for Virginia, Kyle Guy hits a jumper. They get a stop on the next end for Carolina. Rebound down the floor. Kyle Guy hits another jumper. Carolina didn't score a basket for 5-11 after they cut it to 3. Very reminiscent of the game in Charlottesville where Carolina in the last 7-11 did not hit a basket from the floor. But just that calmness. When they were running when Virginia was running its sets, they just never panicked. They had 3 turnovers in the game. As pressurized as that game was, and I'll tell you, Scott, in that arena, that was a tense environment. I mean, that had the feel of a Final Four game. They just never wavered, and the confidence of that team. Ty Jerome, particularly, because he's the point guard. He's the one who sets the tone for that team. I don't know how it translated on TV for folks watching back home, but in the arena, even when it got down to 3, I never doubted it. I never doubted that Virginia was going to win that game because they never doubted it on the floor, and that's just that kind of confidence exuding out of that team is what gives me confidence going into the start of play Friday night that this team is locked in and ready to play and win a championship.
Yes, and you alluded to something, and for us that has followed ACC basketball for a long time, and their opponents as well as we know our own team. And watching that game Saturday, when Roy called that timeout, the first thing that came into my mind is that somewhere Dean Smith is fuming about that, because Dean Smith never, I'm sure never is not a good word, but he would never, unless it was something completely out of the ordinary, he would never call a momentum time. He just did not. That was not Dean's philosophy, and Carolina doesn't generally do that. So, yeah, you pointed that out. Did you, when you saw that happen in person, did you think about that? That's something that's really rarely does a Carolina team do?
Yeah, it spoke to me. I think I even said out loud to Crystal sitting beside me that Dean Smith would be rolling over in his grave right now, seeing Roy call a timeout to stop momentum. And it kind of showed, it's like if we were equating this to, this basketball game to, say, a boxing match, it's sort of like, the one boxer is all of a sudden starting to get a little scared. It kind of felt that way, like he's flinching all of a sudden. And of course they recovered a little bit there and they got back in the game. But I think Roy, he didn't say it in so many words, but he alluded to that in the post game, where you got the sense that he knew that even though the game got close, and I think he may have said it this way, like even when the game was 4 or 6 points, Virginia was so confident that they knew that it was going to still be a battle. Whereas other games where momentum changes, you'll get a different feel. Like, hey, the momentum's in our favor. We're gonna move this. It never felt like the momentum was shifting, even when Carolina was cutting into the lead. It was just a matter of, Virginia was going to grind it out. And I'll say this, having now covered several NCAA tournaments, I don't think this translates on TV. So I'm going to say this now, and Scott, you've obviously covered Final Fours, so this is a good discussion point. As many regular season games as you watch, or ACC tournament or NCAA tournament games that people watch on TV, being in an arena in an NCAA tournament is the most tense thing you can possibly be a part of, because if you lose to Virginia Tech in February, if you lose to Louisville in the ACC tournament in March, there's another game. If you lose starting Thursday, or actually starting tomorrow night with the teams playing in the first 4 games, if you lose, your season's over. And that sense is there. And I think I kind of felt out of Virginia, especially Saturday, but maybe even a bit Friday, that they were sort of testing themselves. Hey, let's start playing like it. We don't want to lose anymore. We can't lose anymore. And because it just changes. I mean, Scott, we've covered 2 Final Fours that Virginia played in back in the 80s. I mean, am I right on that? The tension you can almost literally cut with a knife. It's so tense in these games, and so I think that's why I feel really confident about Virginia, because I think they've already got a practice run at how difficult it's going to be starting for them Friday night. That it's just a different level of intense starting this week.
Absolutely. I'll tell a story about being out in Seattle in the Kingdom when Virginia played, I think it was 84. Played Houston. And we lost that game in final seconds. And just that tremendous disappointment that comes over you, and then you also realize you're stuck there until Monday because you're not traveling all the way back across the country. Even from a fan standpoint, that intensity is ratcheted up so much more, just so much more. You're in a building, generally a venue you haven't been to or you're not familiar with, maybe a part of the country you're not to. You're a little nervous anyway. This is just from a fan or a reporter standpoint. Don't know exactly, never been in it as a player, so don't know what's going through their emotions. You're also in a building where you could have as many fans that are rooting against you. It's certainly not a home court advantage, although we hope Friday night will be somewhat one for Virginia. But After that, the arenas get pretty divided equally. So you've got a lot of, and especially Virginia, we talked about them with the bullseye on their back. They're a target. They're an easy target. A lot of fans are going to want to see them out to maybe try to get some vindication as to maybe we're not really worthy of being a number one team. But and then there's that thought, no more losses up until the Carolina game, up until the end of the ACC. We always had, so to speak, a loss in the bank. You can still lose the game and the season not in. That's over with now. No matter how well we play, we lose, we go home. And it is. When you step foot and we'll know it Friday night, everything changes. The familiarity with how the event is run, the familiar with how things are done at JPJ, even we followed the team on the road. NCAA Tournament's involved now. NCAA is involved in everything is different. And it's truly another season.
It really is, and it's it's the kind of thing that I don't know that we can even properly describe as much as we've been trying how intense it is. And even that 116 game I mentioned, that first 116 game I ever covered was the Coastal game a few years ago. You get down behind. I remember in that game, that was the team. I mean, with some of the guys who will be on the Mount Rushmore of UVA basketball: Malcolm Brogdon, Anthony Gill, Mike Tobey, that group of guys, those guys that we revere and always will. Joe Harris. I mean, those guys that will live in lore for what they did to get this program to where it is. London Parentis. I remember at the media timeout. I want to say it was like the under 4 timeout first half. When I look up at the scoreboard, it's 31-21 Coastal. Virginia's down 10 to the number 16 team, and that team, those guys were as cool customers as you will ever see in your life. And during the media timeout, how media timeouts in the arena take forever. They broke the huddle. Tony had, done what he needed to do in terms of strategy, and those guys were standing there, waiting for the game to start back up. And I saw guys yelling at each other. Those guys never yelled at each other. They never yelled once during the season that year. They didn't yell the next season. They didn't yell the season after that. That was the group that played for 3 years together and won a lot of games. But they were in each other's faces, and not in a positive way. And so even those guys, in that moment felt that pressure. And so, they turn it into a positive. They won by 15 points and that kind of thing. But yeah, it turns people who normally don't raise their voice. Malcolm Brogdon yelling at somebody, but I mean, it changes. And so yeah, it's different. And, I maybe, hopefully Friday night we don't see that. Maybe hopefully Sunday night we don't see that, right? But yeah, it's a different environment. And, I think, you're right, Scott. That team was a number 1 seed, but this team's the number 1 team in the country. A co-favorite to win the championship. Villanova and Virginia are the co-favorites to win the championship now. Even if it's possible, even more pressure as a result of that. So, it's part of the game that I think, just keep that in mind when you're watching back home. That these guys are 18, 19, 20 years old, and it's a lot to process while you're also playing a game in front of a crowd of people and millions watching back home.
Yeah, and so you just answered my question. Even for us fans and reporters, things change. We react differently, and you just noted that against Coastal Carolina, you saw a different type of character coming out of the UVA players.
Yeah.
I think everybody. They know the stakes. They know that you slip up, you lose. There's no other game. That's it. You go home and you watch the rest of the tournament on TV. So it's fun. But it's certainly not for the weak of heart.
I remember, and now, so the players, we're talking about the players and their reactions. I remember, I guess at the 2016 season, We all remember the loss to Syracuse, of course, in the Elite Eight after the big lead in the first half, into the second half. I remember, though, even before the game, the Sweet 16 game against Iowa State, I have never been more nervous in my life. Now, the Syracuse game, of course, whatever, but as a fan, observer of the program, I mean, from the time I've followed this program since I was old enough to remember anything. You work yourself up into a frenzy, and at least I do, and I'm sure a lot of folks listening do as well. So that's okay to do because we're all doing it. So that said, I don't know why that Iowa State game, I could not calm down, and I know that if I can't calm down, those kids out there playing. I mean, at some point, I'm sure very quickly muscle memory kicks in. They're playing basketball, but man. That's how intense this is, sitting in the arena, being there, et cetera, et cetera. And now even more expectations for this team, I guess. There's also the aspect of there's still plenty of people in the media and fans, fans of other programs, I guess, who want to detract from what UVA's success has been the last 5 years, who can't wait for UVA to lose so they can say, see, we told you so, they're overrated. I think that's been addressed when questions were asked at press conferences after games this week in Brooklyn. It was always along the lines of, hey, you guys got a big target on your backs. The kids know it. They definitely know they got a big target on their backs. So I guess I'm just saying this to the fans listening to say, cut them some slack. They may not go out and impress the hell out of you Friday night. They may not win the game by 50 points like you expect them to. They're going to win Friday night. But if it's not quite to your standards, there's a lot of reasons why, I guess, is what I would leave you with there.
Yeah, there is. And, having time to have read a lot today and let's reflect back, here's some things I think we forget, and we forget once the season's over and the next season starts, we kind of forget what happened last year and why the tournament is so unpredictable. If you remember, Villanova was the number 1 seed last year.
Yeah.
And Villanova got beat by Wisconsin.
Yeah.
They suffered an early exit to Wisconsin last year. Things last year, Xavier had a great season, had a great tournament. They had a very mediocre regular season. There's some things that's happening this year too that's going to be. You got a team like Alabama. No one's heard of Alabama, not in basketball anyway. Right. But Alabama made one of the best players in the country, in Colin Sexton, who can go on a 40-point tear any night. And you might face an Alabama team that you're not ready for that. Missouri, they've got back their freshman superstar, Porter. Is that?
Yeah.
Michael Porter.
Yeah.
He's back. He's played 2 games. He missed almost the entire season. There's another snake in the grass waiting out there. So it's so many variables that most people don't even know about until it happens to you. So it's fun. I guess that's why they call it March Madness. And for some of the teams that didn't get involved, they got left out. Saw a term today, March Sadness. So just be happy we're there and have this extra time to enjoy.
Yeah, that's, and I would leave on that note too to say, we will be disappointed, and and we would have, because this season has been so special already, 31-2, 20-1 in the ACC. We want to be 37-2. We want to hang a banner. We want to have the victory parade and everything else. But only one team wins their last game of the season. Only one. 350 teams lose their last game of the season, and I'm saying this now because I'll probably will vocalize it differently if Virginia loses between now and the first Monday in April. But this has been a special season. Nothing takes that away. I mean, we want to go to San Antonio for lots and lots of reasons. But I'm thinking back to that 2014 team, which I think would have won a national championship. if Anthony Gill doesn't sprain his ankle and miss the last 17 minutes and we lose by 1 point to Michigan State. We wouldn't hate Michigan State so much if Anthony Gill doesn't sprain his ankle. Weird things happen in one game. Kentucky that same year, Kentucky beat an undefeated Wichita State team in the second round of the tournament. Weird thing, like Scott said, weird things happen. That all said, I think this Virginia team is as well poised as any team, not just Virginia team, but any team I've seen in the last, say, 5 or 6 years of covering college basketball very, very closely. It's a team with a lot of talent, a lot of senior leadership, but also, even the sophomores, Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy, and DeAndre Hunter, the best players in this team, they play like veterans. And if things work out the right way, we'll be there. We'll be there. But just enjoy it. I'm saying this to myself, Scott, and maybe to you, as much as all those people out there listening. As much as we can, let's just enjoy it, because this has been a special season, and I think it will continue to be a special season. I think I may have lost Scott right here at the end. So.
No, I'm here. I'm sorry. One thing that we've got to remember, and you and I probably can relate to this better than anyone, is that regardless of what happens, it has been a great team, and we have a tremendous foundation. This is not a once in a lifetime run. This is something that we hope will be a yearly event for us that we look forward to March Madness. And if it doesn't end the way we want it, we know we can get over it, because you and I both know that we were one half away from the Final Four appearance a couple years ago, and just the unexpected happened to us. And you and I think, both took it pretty hard. I think I stayed in the house for about 10 days, but we got over it, and if something happens like that this year, and we'll get over it again. But the good thing to know is what solid foundation this program is built on right now.
Yeah, we are very fortunate. These are the good days for UVA basketball, and for us observers and fans and people who wear their hearts on their sleeve, and we get to enjoy it. So for our listeners out there, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. Now, Scott and I will get back together a little bit later this week, and we'll break down UMBC, the game, more specifically. I'll do some studying up on UMBC. Scott's already watched some tape, so I'm going to do my breakdowns of the game, and then we'll come back and we'll break that one down for you. Game by game, possession by possession is the working process for Virginia basketball. So we're going to do the same thing. And then, of course, Scott and I are heading down to Charlotte on Friday morning. We'll be there for the game Friday evening, 9:20 start. So we'll be there in the house and getting you ready, and then we'll assume that we'll be there through Sunday, because we're assuming that Virginia will do their job and play either Creighton or Kansas State. Get you ready for that one as well. A lot of fun, big weekend coming up, and everything you need to know and more about Virginia basketball you'll get right here at Augusta Free Press. So for Scott German, I'm Chris Graham signing off. Wahoo wah.